Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Burning Desire Show. It has been a little while, but our next guest, and I always ask the name and I forgot how to pronounce it. Is it Andres Klaric? Have I got that right?
That that's perfect.
All right. So yeah, and also my schedule is crazy busy, but I looked at your profile and I'm like, this guy's pretty interesting. So I feel like I'm going to give you the time to come on and share your story, to be fair, because at the minute with my schedule, having to be a bit selective more than I'd like to be. But I looked at your profile and I'm like, yeah, this guy's pretty interesting.
Thank you, Charles. I'm very excited to be here today. Happy Friday.
Yeah, likewise. So I always like to begin, as I mentioned, just in the like slight pre-recording there of with the Steve Jobs quote of that you can't connect dots going forwards, only backwards. And I note from doing some research that you grew up in Bolivia. Can you talk a little bit about your upbringing? Like I always like to understand from the first thing that you got, we all do that's outside of our parents is we go to school, right? And like, so what sort of school, what kind of, were you into your studies? Obviously, you're in finance. I presume maths was a thing. That kind of, where do we start here?
Thank you. So, as you mentioned, grew up in Bolivia. I was actually born in the United States, but I was raised my entire life, my childhood and teenage years in La Paz, Bolivia. Uh, I think I grew up with my parents kind of really instilling that sense of like, at some point when you graduate from high school, you're going to have the opportunity, hopefully, to go to the US and get your university degree there. But I would say like those first 18 years of your life, it was kind of, I mean, when you're like 10, 12, 15, 18, just that post life just seems decades away, right? And then life happens. I would say one of the things that I yearn in terms of when I was thinking about the future at that age uh, was perhaps finding a place that was academic to kind of like share that like kind of level of curiosity that I had. Because obviously, like the beauty about high school is that the spectrum of kids, right? The level of interest that they have. And you're going to have kids that are very focused in school and kids that don't. Some folks don't even want to go to university. It's a very different environment, right? And some people want to be artists, some people they're still like finding themselves. And they're perhaps like I was one of those that like I'm going to university and then I'm going to get a career, right? Like that kind of stuff. And you arrive to university, and first and foremost, you have that first kind of bath of humility, right? Because you realize like how much more competitive the world is, and of course, like you need to not forget the fact that like you are your own benchmark, right? Because otherwise, if you start kind of uh, competing against others, especially in certain things, you're always going to find yourself in like I lesser than someone else, right? So that you're gonna live a very unhappy life if you do so. So from Bolivia to the US, I think like that step uh was kind of clear to me, like in terms of like that uh but in terms of like how would it unfold? Would I end up living in New York? Uh all the other stuff was unknown. I would say the first 24, 25 years of your life, if you're kind of, I want to be a professional in a certain field, that's generally mapped and there's like a recipe, but the rest is just, then
Yeah,
it starts like that process of like
I
taking directional bets, so to speak.
think that's pretty interesting to be fair. I'm just interested. You said you grew up, you were born, sorry, in the US. Did your parents go, is it for a job or something that they moved back
My
home?
parents were in school here, so like they thought they were very intentional. They were like, we're finishing our degrees here, like they just have a kid here,
Ah,
and
okay.
it's
And then they
that
moved back to their home country, which is Bolivia, right?
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Like, and as you know, in the U.S. you have birthright citizenship, so it was not a bad thing to help me be an American. In the UK, you don't have
Free
that, but
birth,
like in the
free
yeah,
birth, you got a little leg
yeah,
up. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Nice. So I know that when you were in your school, all your schooling up until college or university, we'd call it here, was that done in Bolivia and then you moved to the States, or did you move to the States prior to?
Exactly, exactly. The first 18 years of my life were in Bolivia.
Right.
So I'm 36 now. I spent half and half of my life. I still cannot get rid of my accent, but you could say like 18 years in Bolivia, 18 years in the US.
I got you. I got you. And you went to University of Pennsylvania, which is obviously a pretty famous university. UPenn is the kind of acronym or the way people abbreviate
Yeah.
it. What did you study there? Because again, I do explain to people because a lot of people that watch stuff from the UK. In the UK, we do university or college very differently, and as far as I think is bad comparative to the US system, where we select a specialty before actually attending. So, like, you have to say, I'm doing a business degree, you'd call it major, or you'd say, I have to do a French degree, and that's what it is. You don't, as you do in the West, like major and minor, and you can kind of mix and match a degree to suit your needs. How did you, or what did you end up doing at UPenn?
I ended up studying economics, political science, and I did a lot of focus on mathematics. I think in hindsight, I guess my if I had the benefit of a time machine, I would probably just would have done like one major and done just treat the rest as a buffet, right? Like the American universities, as you mentioned, is you can take unlimited classes, right? Like especially private schools, it's just as much as your schedule allows. And there's it's such a unique time to be a sponge that in hindsight it would have been nice to take in a I don't know, like more cla physics classes or like learn more languages or who knows, just take a class more philosophy classes. Just so many other things that like later in life become more difficult, and not necessarily because you cannot be self-taught later in life. You can actually consume a ton of books throughout your life. It's just learning as a group, right? Like the discussion groups, those sorts of things that I think make the college experience in at least in the US, amazing, right? Like God knows what's going to happen in 20 years when this new generation is in university. But at least for me, the discussion groups that shared kind of sharing perspectives was one of the things that I treasure the most of my experience as a university student.
So you graduate from UPenn and you're well, actually prior to graduating, you did a summer analyst job at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had I always remember I had friends because I went to university, decided it wasn't for me, and then like went down the completely different path.
Mm.
And I had friends at the time that did the summer analyst type thing,
Yeah.
and I have a rough idea as to what that entails. But for people that don't, can you explain what that actually means or what that is?
Uh, a summer internship is just essentially a long form interview, right? Like it means like you go work at a place, most likely with the opportunity at the end of that period to be offered, if you perform, uh, to be an opportunity to be given a, a long-term job opportunity there, right? It's usually done in between. In the US, you have like 4-year programs, right? I think in the UK and most of Europe is 3-year programs for most undergrads. So uh, it at least in the era that I was an undergrad, most folks will do it in between their third and 4 year of school. I think as the job market has become much more competitive, some people do it between their second and third, or even their first and second, depending on how much experience you already have and value you can bring to the table. But for general purposes, between your third and 4th year of school during that summer, um, the type of job you will do is obviously is very assisted. You're going to assist deal teams, and depending on how you perform, you're going to allow you to do more and more of. You're not going to be a critical piece, but at least it allows you to get your feet wet and kind of like see how this person thinks, how they think about attention to detail, what's their analytical power, and after those usually 10 to 12 weeks you have the opportunity to know if you can come back or not, and you decide, right? It's not that you need to take the offer either, but it's a great opportunity for both parties, meaning the employer and the employee, to see if it's a good fit for them. I trust me, like the hours are just identical. Obviously, you're younger, you're like just less, so you're obviously like you're less productive. And the amount of pre-training that you have versus someone that is a full-time person that is significantly lower. Just to give you an example, for a summer intern, I think you have like less than a week of training. Whereas when you start full-time, if I recall correctly, it might have been almost 10 weeks of training before they put us on the floor, right? So It's very different. And one is like sink or swim, and the other one is like we're gonna make sure that you're pretty value added by the time we put you on the floor.
And were the hours quite grueling in the summer analyst?
Yeah, it's exactly what you would imagine. Like it just uh with it with the subtracted element of there's zero partying, very little. Like you just want to sleep, right? But I think that there is this HBO show industry. I think it shows mostly the sales and trading folks. I was an investment banker. I just very, very different, and very different life.
What's the show called? Industry.
Yeah.
Oh,
You never heard about it?
no, I don't. I think I may have heard about it. I don't think I've seen it. I have to check that out. I'm interested at Goldman Sachs. What was the well, twofold. What was the culture like? Because you then we'll talk about a minute. You went on to a number of different finance
Yeah.
houses, maybe you call them Credit Suisse and
Mhm.
others. And then also maybe what was the interview process like for Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, I think that the interview process is the same across banks, right? It's like usually the first interview is like what's called a fit interview, like just see if this guy or gal like nice, would I like to kind of pass like the internal test of what they're looking for. And usually you have like what it's called a super day. They usually fly you, or like if you're in a closer city, take a train. If you're in the city, you just take a taxi, and you spend an entire morning or an entire day, afternoon, usually interviewing 5, 10 people, and they pretty quickly tell you yes or no. That's kind of how it works in terms of like the process of the interviews. In terms of like once you're there, I at least when I was at Goldman, I think, and Goldman still has this aura of like it is the premier investment bank, right? So I do think that people there know that there's a reputation to live up to. There's a culture of excellence. There's this client first mentality. And I think that I was there in 2010, 14 years ago, and it was right after, and it was in with the backdrop of everything that had happened during the financial crisis, right? And um, issues with mortgages and things like that. So there was a culture of like just be very careful with the press. People will take things out of context. And I think if I recall, it might have been happened in the context of like a settlement that they had with the U.S. government. So I do remember there was a lot of attention in the organization. So it was very clear that that there was no space for error, right? So um I think that kind of marked me in terms of like let's be very careful on how we say things, how we say it, who do we say it to, and and really like that shift to like risk management in a unique way. Um, that is kind of like some of my takeaways in terms of like broad corporate culture. I would say at the team culture, it's like just you imagine, right? Like very well high achieving folks, very sharp, well spoken. What do you would imagine? In terms, some of them I would describe them as kind of they could be if they were putting YouTube videos, they would be like having millions of views because some of them are just some of the most eloquent folks I've ever had the opportunity to listen to. To this day, um, it's kind of I follow them and see like what are they up to because you think like this person is incredible in terms of how they convey value to customers.
So that's interesting. Yeah, what about these people versus other people that you come across that obviously had a big impact upon you? Was it the polish? Was it the way in which, as you say, the eloquence, just when they were dealing with a problem, how they're communicating? Like, what was it there? Something's obviously pretty strong that's kind of kept you or them in your mind, like what, 10 plus years
I would
later?
say the uncompromising level with quality and like client but I remember this is just to put you like a tangible example. This was the day before a board meeting that we were presenting to a big Fortune 500 company, and the partner discovered that one of the folks on attendance at the board was colorblind. So we needed to recolor 150 pages of the deck, like to make sure that there were no red and greens or things like that. And we did it. It took us an entire day. And I do remember after that, there was no, and I remember the email, hey, it was an amazing meeting. It was one of the classics. We didn't open the book, but like, thanks so much for the hard work. So, and they would always say, right, like some of the best meetings are the ones in which you actually don't flip through the pages. But trust me, I was there until like, I don't know, 4 or 5 in the morning, checking that all the 20 books that got printed like did not have any of uh, colors or things like that. It will create confusion for someone that's colorblind. So that's thoughtfulness. Just tells you like how much they care about it. Not only just the quality of the analysis is that uh, I found out tangentially that this person is colorblind, right? Like, and in most instances, you'll be like, oh, I'm sure that there's like a no, no ambiguity. We're for this new member of the board, we're gonna be inclusive and make sure that this person can actually appreciate the deck. So that's
That's
that kind of stuff.
that's amazing. And then, as you say, when it went to other kind of finance companies, Credit Suisse and others, did you find in each place that the culture or the type of people were different, and that Goldman was like, as you say, it's the premier kind of bank? Did you find that not that people at Credit Suisse aren't worthy or anything like this, but like, did you
Yeah,
find there were different sort of levels in different companies as you kind of went through your career?
I think you have teams, right? Like it's kind of Goldman is kind of like the maximum, and you will see it's like this is like 14 years ago. Things have changed a little bit, right? Uh, but at that point, when I joined Credit Suisse, the particular team that I was joining, right, like was number one in the street for the thing that they were doing, right? So, each team has its claim to fame, right? Like I think that Goldman kind of fits more the overall, but it's kind of how you think about, uh, let's say like football teams, right? Like, you will have Real Madrid, right? Like I understand, like but when you think about the way that X team plays certain things, or like who has the best striker or the best historical defense, or like the best way to win a Champions League, is it like each investment bank has the kind of the claim to fame for certain categories of like the best TMT, the best healthcare, the best left fin, or the most thoughtful like uh kind of M&A defense team. Like there's just like things like that, they're like some nuanced approaches, but I I would say like the key difference between, well, Credit Suisse now is part of UBS, was that Credit Suisse, I think, uh was just way more conservative, right? Like they couldn't use the balance sheet at the level that like either like some of the big US banks had, and they had like kind of that private bank mentality from the kind of that historical operation, how they approached deal making, right? And it was just different. Obviously, like they probably started doing more risk taking bets. No matter that's how they got in trouble uh, the years after I left. But I do think that that's kind of the key differences that I noticed. Right, like European banking is just very different than American banking. They had different set of regulations they needed to comply to. Just when you think about like the historical dependence on like the private bank, very different from what Goldman had. That kind of stuff, I would say, were obvious things that I noticed.
And then you move over to is it HIG Capital as a VP, and what again people who are outside the banking world and also US banking might not know what that position means. What were you doing for those guys?
Yeah, that is investing. That's pure investing, right? So, private equity. So, private equity, what it is like long-term, illiquid investments in usually in companies, right? So you buy and sell companies. You raise money from like retirement funds, universities, endowments, family offices, and you use that capital to buy companies in combination with debt. And you usually hope that that company continues to improve and grow, pay down that debt, and at the end of the ownership process the company is worth more and it has less debt, so you ultimately have an upside on the total enterprise value of the company that you capture as an investor, right? Like it's usually 5, 10 year time horizons. And I was mostly doing they're like tech and business services investing. It's a very different thing, right? Like the banking side, it's called the sell side, right? Like they sell you companies. And in the private equity investment world is usually called the buy side, right? It's your job is to buy companies.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And so then, am I right in thinking, was it over COVID that you start founding this new company? Because in fact, just before that, you do in 2017, which is super interesting. I want to talk about. You do an MBA at Harvard Business School, right?
Yeah. Yes, I did my MBA at Harvard. That's where I met my co-founder. I met my co-founder almost 9 years ago now to this date. Yeah, HBS, Harvard Business School was a great opportunity. It was very fun 2 years, and it opened a network that's unparalleled, I would say, when it comes to business.
So how did that come about? You were doing your kind of day-to-day kind of professional work, and did you want to further yourself, or you the opportunity arose to, or how did that even work?
Yeah, after like, banking, I worked at another buy side shop, and after like it's usually like a very common path. I wish I could tell you, oh, I had this great idea, let's go to Harvard, but it's a lot of folks that like it's a very normal path to spend like 4 years, 3 to 5 years, I would say, working and then going to business school. Most business schools will prefer if you have job experience, and usually those 4 or 5 years is what that sweet spot for them. So I think from an experience standpoint, I felt confident in terms of like the experience that I had amassed, and I thought it's time to apply it, right? And I was lucky enough that I got good grades on the standardized tests, and and I felt, hey, let's apply, and obviously as you apply, you need to kind of put together a narrative on why and put together an application explaining why you're going to be additive to that year's class. And at that point, I thought, hey, like maybe at some point I want to start a business. So most of my application kind of revolved around that, right? Like I've seen XYZ. I need I want to meet folks with the similar visions, and I want to give back in this shape or form. And it kind of played out that way. It didn't necessarily. I didn't start a business right after business school, but it played out ultimately that way.
Did you presumably you actually went to Harvard physically, right? It wasn't
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was. It's you're there, right? Like it's a class of 800, 900 people every year that go, and you spend there 2 years. Uh, the first year you spend it with a smaller cohort of 90 people that like it's called your section. And you take all the classes together with those same 90 people for the first year. So you're kind of nonstop with this 90 people. They become like your 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 community within Harvard. And then the second year you kind of mix with all the other classes. You start and you take classes more based on personal interest versus like instead of taking just a fixed curriculum. And like you can that's how you meet other folks too. But it's to this day, like I would say, here in New York, a good chunk of the friends that I have are from grad school.
Oh, and what sort of stuff are you learning? Because people hear business school, and then obviously Harvard Business School is probably the most
Mm-hmm.
revered or famous in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you learning there? Because I guess there's people that are going to say, like, you can't learn business, right? Like, you got to just do it. But like, what? I guess it's theory. What's like, what sort of classes were you taking? Like, what sort of things were you actually learning at that point?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you ask, right? Like, I think some folks don't necessarily have, some people come from engineering backgrounds and they're never taking a finance class. So some folks come from marketing and they're never taking an accounting class. And, and I think it's kind of nice to see because you have kind of cohorts. Within those 90 people, you have people from the military, people who were in marketing, people who were like in finance, people that were nonprofits. And this, it's the way that Harvard teaches things is based on the case model. So you kind of read usually like a 110-page case, and then you discuss that case in class, and the professor is just like driving the conversation in such a way that the kind of the students teach the other students what the takeaway of that conversation, and at the end of the case, the professor kind of reveals what happened. But like what you're doing is you're problem solving. Each class is just problem solving a business problem. Like it could be a finance problem, an accounting problem, an HR problem, a marketing problem, and it's super cool, right? Because in essence, you're playing CEO every day, and of course it's easy because armchair. It's kind of it's not the same thing as now that I've run a company. It's not the same, but that simulation in itself helps you, right? And you also, it's awesome to see how articulate some folks are at explaining a problem, and even if you disagree with them, right? Like from you get they are so good at expressing their perspectives that you're like, despite the fact that I'm sure that their perspective, it's something that they say it so well and so eloquently that I'm like, I'm sold. Yeah.
That makes sense. And is it a pass or fail? Is that basically what it gets to at the end of it?
Yeah, you have grades, but the grades are not disclosed. And most people just pass, right? Like I would say the vast majority of people, because there's no pressure on that. I think that a lot of people kind of like, well, use business school not only for the learning, it just it's a huge networking opportunity, right? Like it's 900 people. Um, it you're gonna have folks for all walks of life there, right? So and people use it differently, right? Like some people use it also as a kind of a recovery camp from being burned out in their prior job, right? And you have a couple bucks saved, and you travel with folks that like are, I don't know, from like somewhere else, and they show you the country. There's and that's kind of how networking happens too, right?
Mhm.
It's like a more organic way of meeting people.
So when you came out of there, like what did your perspective change from because you went back into the finance world, right? And did you
Yeah.
always intend to do that, or was it kind of a stopgap
Yeah,
while
that was
you
the
figure it out?
no. The plan was to continue in finance for a couple of years. I think I knew that down the road I wanted to start something, but I I I felt that needed to acquire more knowledge, and usually finance jobs for me have been a great breeding grounds for like just understanding companies. And I think the beauty about finance is you're a fox, right? Like you're just learning very little about a lot of things, right? So if you're very curious, like finance allows you to like go very broad in terms of like the knowledge you acquire. And now, as a founder, I'm a hedgehog, right? Like I need to really perfect the sales machine of my B2B SaaS company, right? So it's no longer like me understanding, oh, the financial of this company, and like next day I'm learning, oh, what's the debt like for this for a healthcare company, and the next day understanding how is this services company selling software to oil companies.
That makes
In this part of Texas, right? It's very different, the velocity of learning.
So, what stage did you? Because it looks like it was 2020 when you kind of made the decision to start this company called Fuse
Yeah.
Finance, right? And was that anything to do with COVID that gave you that kind of shift of gears, or just coincidence the time frames?
No, COVID definitely was a catalyst, right? Like things were changing, and I think we're all trapped in our apartments, homes, wherever we were at that time, and thinking like, what am I going to do with my life, right? Like, it just is this exactly the type of career that I want to pursue, or do I want to use my 30s and 40s to like swing for the fences, right? Like, how do I what what's I want to minimize regret, and and at that point, like starting a business um seemed like a very nice challenge. And obviously you started from your small apartment in San Francisco, and today we're almost at 30 employees, right? And it's still a small business, but something that starts off like, oh, today I'm going to start a business and I'm going to incorporate it. All of a sudden becomes something, right? And it's not all of a sudden. It takes 4 years, and it still takes a lot of hard work, and it's still a fragile business, like everything else, right? Like ask for example, Kodak, right? Like even like empires can fall on its own weight. So you cannot be complacent, but it's nice sometimes to just take that pause and realize I have a lot to be grateful for. My co-founder, our employees, our clients, our families. There's a lot of sacrifice that go into this, and like we're the sum of efforts, right, to get to where we are.
So I agree with that. Listen, I'm a business owner as well, so I know exactly what that means. And I am interested to understand the story here. So, you're a VP of this buy side shop, as you describe it, and
Mm.
you've met you presumably you have this kind of cohort of people that you're in touch with, including your co-founder. What was the idea? Why did it come about? And like, what is it that you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, the original idea was automating the process of refinancing consumer loans in the United States. As rates were coming down, we saw an opportunity there. So we recruited a bunch of lenders here. Just months after like actually launching the product, we realized both people actually are more interested in the technology we built behind it than actually the acquisition marketing funnel that we've devised to do this. So within we quickly realized, hey, people are okay buying loans from us, but they seem to be thrilled to buy the software from us. So should we switch? And of course, like when you raise venture money and all of that, it's not just you switch, right? And even if you don't raise venture money, like if you have something that's working, why switch, right? So my co-founder and I had like very very serious conversations around like, is this the market we want to go in? Is this riskier? How can we de-risk this process? So there was an entire couple months in which we were like really like vetted if the B2B of like selling technology to lenders was actually more attractive than B2C to what we were doing. And we started assigning up folks, right? Like we were like, hey, they're still being productized, but this is the engine. This is kind of how it looked like. This is the capabilities. Would you be interested in switching here? And we started like adding more and more folks, and we realized this is definitely where we need to build. And we made that switch, and we never looked back. We raised over 10 million bucks of capital since then.
Wow.
It's we're really just focused on selling infrastructure and like software infrastructure to like lenders, right? To make them more agile, more automated,
So
and
let's
ultimately delight their customers.
so let me say let's say like I'm a lender.
Mm.
Like, what is it exactly that you guys allow me to do that I struggle with currently?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For example, there's like uh there's a heavy dependence on engineers, right? So there's two options: hire more engineers, get them a very expensive machine that you need to pay a company to change it every time you want to make a change, or you get a very good piece of software that allows you, Mr. or Mrs. Not Engineer, to make those changes,
Yep.
right? So that is one of the things, right? Making low code, no code. That technology really exists. It was just not being applied in the context of financial software, right? So that is one, like changing decision trees, dragging and dropping. So the underwriters, the folks at the bank, the credit union, the finance company can do that. Second is integrations, right? So obviously there's a plethora of other microservices or endpoints that you want to connect to. So instead of like telling lenders,
Yes. I could pause. This is broke up. Sorry. So you were just saying about the no code, low code, or very little code, and then
mm,
can
yeah,
you? Sorry.
yeah, the low code no code is key, right? Like essentially, you bridge the gap between engineering teams and business teams to be able to collaborate better. The technical teams do much more tactical, instead of doing tactical stuff, they switch into strategic work. And the business teams can actually don't have to wait for the engineers to get to something. They can actually make most of the changes themselves. Then it's integrations. You want to be able to inundate the market with integrations, kind of like Netflix. You're not going to watch every movie, but having them is super super useful, right? Because you can actually test things, uh never say no to an integration. Last but not least is dashboards. All the ultimate goal, the nirvana, is to have 100% automation, right? And that's kind of what we allow our customers to do, but like they prefer to have humans in the loop, right? So when they have humans in the loop, what do those dashboards look like, right? Depending on the position that they are within the organization, and how do you minimize training cycles, right? Or just completely reduce them to zero. And so that, let's say if their job is pressing a couple buttons every day, then like their screen should just be those buttons, right? Instead of like having to train them to use an entire system, just make it very simple, and so that they can focus on the relationship building with that borrower.
Yep. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And you did say that I read rather that you turned down Y Combinator. And again, people that
Yeah.
know Y Combinator is kind of the founding ground program for lots of billion-dollar plus companies, Airbnb, one of the most famous ones, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about, and why do you end up turning that down?
Yeah, it was not an easy decision. We thought a lot about it, but I would say like what it came down to, we applied before we actually raised venture money, and like within the timeline that we were like, it's a couple weeks that it takes to get the interview. We raised capital, right? So by the as we raised capital, it seemed uh, that like maybe we're not going. A lot of there's a ton of other value you can derive from YC, right? But like one of the biggest ones is like you're going to raise VC money. So we raised the VC money, and that eroded a little bit the value prop. And second, we were doing at that point, this is 3 4 almost 3 years ago. So at that point we were doing more consumer, right? Like the company that we pivoted from. So what we were trying to do did not necessarily seem like the best. YC did not seem like the best breeding route for what we were trying to build then. I think had we were trying to build what we're building today, YC would have been very helpful. The only other caveats that I will add is like we're a little bit older, right? Like we're not engineers. Right? My co-founder is highly technical, but I'm not an engineer. We had already gone to business school. There are a couple of other things that came into play, but like the most important one was like we had raised VC money, and we were building consumer fintech. So those two were kind of the governing reasons behind it. I think in most circumstances, I would tell people to say yes, but if they have some of that nuance thing, they should probably think about it.
I think there's two last things I want to ask you. One is you
Mhm.
mentioned I think it could be on LinkedIn about purpose in business being important to
Yeah.
you. And what do you see that? What does that mean to you, and what does it mean to other people?
Yeah, I mean, it has, I guess, for everyone has its own definition, but so I cannot speak for them, but I can tell you what it means for me. I am the son of immigrants. I've never seen banks as negative. If anything, I I've seen like banks as where the place where you go to get money when like your parents send you money, right? Like it's in that money that enable you to go to school, to pay for college. So I see the positiveness of like the credits, banks, payments, everything like the banking system provides. I want to help financial institutions be more efficient. And I mean, there's multiple ways to do it. In our case, we want to make the process of issuing a loan, funding a loan, much more simple, and we want to reduce the cost of doing that. And when you reduce the cost of doing that, you can look at it from the Milton Friedman approach, in which like shareholders will be better off. Reality is also if you reduce the cost, you have more money to lend. If you have more money to lend, there's more people that can, more businesses get money, more businesses are created, more jobs are created. Same thing, more kids go to school, more like it just that virtuous cycle goes on. And I think that that's the purpose that we have.
That makes a lot of sense. And what was my? I just wanted to ask you as well. Like, so from founding the company to now having 30 employees, as you mentioned, and 10 million of capital that's been invested in the company. How has your kind of role changed over time? From, I suppose, at the beginning doing everything and wearing all the hats to now, I
Yeah.
suppose, being more of a management and visionary thinker.
I think like you still do some of the stuff you used to do before. You need to start leveraging yourself, right? Like and see where kind of uh Musk talked about is a couple in the last 2 years, right? And like how much a minute in Tesla, how much an ROI it creates versus other companies in dollars. So you need to quickly identify where you can leverage yourself and like delegate those components. Uh, I would say like for most founders, most people trying to start a company, they think that out of the gates they're going to be like over leveraging everything and just calling shots. I will warn against that mentality. If anything, the delegation is something that happens over time, but doesn't happen immediately. Uh, what you need to be ready at the very early stage of your company is to know the fact that like nothing is beneath you, and you're going to be doing a lot of stuff that like you actually find very tedious, and it perhaps is even less complex than your current job is, right? So what I would warn like because the delegation part, I would say it's champagne problems to get to that point. The hardest part is just like to the very beginning to realize, oh wow, I need to do all the stuff that I used to not do.
Do you now find as well like your position, given you've got 30 people and on top of that they'll have dependents, etc. Um, and you've got obviously 10 million of investor money. Like, how do you handle that kind of pressure differently to when it's just you? I guess you did always have some debt in the company when you brought your kind of venture on, but how do you find that kind of difference now with you kind of do you look at it as a great opportunity? I think feel like you're that kind of guy rather than someone that's like, oh, I've got 30 paychecks to pay, like all these kind of things you
Mhm.
got
Yeah.
to.
No, it's a huge responsibility, right? Like obviously, venture in our case is equity, right? But it's still like it's a responsibility to your investors and to your employees. In the case of employees, it's like they are betting on you. Like they believe in this idea, and they're like spending. They're usually younger than us, right? They're spending like uh precious moments of their career to like betting that like the vision of the company is going to be realized. So of course that doesn't go unnoticed, right? Like we're super grateful, and like I would say our between our employees and our clients are like essentially what makes the fuse, right? Like it's like this symbiotic nature, and we're extremely grateful for both of them, to both of them for like betting on us, right? And the more we grow, the more the responsibility you feel in our shoulders, right? So it's easy to wake up every day and be like, let's do it, because obviously we don't want to disappoint any of those parties.
No, it's interesting. I think my last follow up, and it's actually where the business that I'm running is, where I think almost every business is true, but very much so my business and similarly your business, the client satisfaction and getting things right and that kind of thing, and excelling in what you do on the client side is the fuel of the business. Um, and did you find initially letting go or delegating areas of the business was a bit of was challenging because when you're handling it, it's done in a certain way to a certain standard. Maybe bringing this conversation back to a cycle, back from like your Goldman times, you want it done in a certain kind of
Mm.
standard. And then of course you do hire the right people, but there's always an element of they could do it better than you, of course they can, but there's always the element of how do we make sure that the for you guys
Yeah.
with use, how do you make sure that's kind of standardized service is given?
You document everything, right? Like there's no tribal knowledge. Everything is just essentially you codify
You
everything, right?
call
You
it
create systems.
tribal knowledge, sorry.
Tribal knowledge is kind of like, oh, this is the way we do it, and like just someone you go there and you actually don't know what the way they do it means. Like there's no like guidance, playbooks, nothing, right? Like that's what tribal knowledge is. Just
I've
it's
never heard
you
that
just
term before.
learn.
I know
Yeah,
I know the
yeah,
term, but I've never heard it like
yeah,
that. Okay, it's interesting.
yeah, yeah. So it usually implies that like there's no written codes, right? So for us to just codify it in such a way that we execute it that way. And also, if you don't leverage yourself, you're making an inherent trade-off that like some of the areas of the business are gonna suffer, right? Like so, by virtue of not deciding to make that call, you're effectively making a call, right? Like if
Yeah.
you say yes, 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 you're inherently saying no somewhere. So I think that we cannot lie ourselves in that regard. Like we're making a trade-off somewhere if we don't want to delegate.
No, listen, it's been very, very interesting, and I really appreciate you
Mm,
giving us some of your time as to sharing some of your story. And yeah, I wish you the best with it. Sounds like it's going very well already. 3, 4 years in, and everything seems to be pretty interesting. I know you're big on LinkedIn, and in fact, I noticed that you are classed as a top finance voice on there. So congratulations
mm.
for that, because that's not easy to achieve.
Thank
Um,
you.
and yeah, I look forward to following what you're doing, and I guess people can find you on LinkedIn. And is that your main source of kind of where to?
Yeah, that's the best way, and like I try to make time for everyone.
Great. Well, listen, as I say, thank you very much. Enjoy what must be morning for you right now, I presume. Enjoy the rest of
Yes,
Friday, and yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
thank you, Charles.